Now, this video is primarily about bear defense, but it can also apply to hunting big game like moose or elk as well. The best place to get good advice on bear guns, whether for hunting or bear defense, is from someone with a lot of experience, like a guide. I have to mention though, not every guide will give you the best advice, which I'll talk about more later in this video. For those of you who don't know, Tia Shoemaker is a guide and the daughter of the very experienced Alaskan guide Phil Shoemaker. I'd like to go over the evolution of her thinking and the evolution of the rifles she uses while she guides. But first, a disclaimer. Tia has admitted that guns are not her main expertise. Regardless of this, we can learn many things from her. It's important to mention that being a great guide or hunter doesn't automatically give you a perfect understanding of guns. For people like Tia, guns are just a necessary tool for the job. Tia started out with a Winchester Model 70 in .338 Win Mag, but once she started guiding bear hunts, she decided that the .338 was, quote, a bit underpowered. This is when she switched to a Ruger Alaskan chambered in .375 Ruger. The reason why she stopped using the Ruger Alaskan requires a little explanation in the form of a short story. Now, Tia was guiding in a specific area that was dangerous because of a nearby gut pile. She made sure to tell her client that it was a dangerous area and she had a round in the chamber. She had to cross a river though, so she took the round out of her chamber. When a bear charged her, she tried to chamber a round, but the rifle jammed. She then threw down her rifle and grabbed the client's rifle, which apparently also didn't have a round in the chamber either. Thankfully, before she could chamber a round, the bear veered away and didn't attack. Now, the reason her rifle jammed was because she used flat-nosed bullets. For reference, flat-nosed bullets may not feed reliably in every rifle due to their shape. The pointed Spitzer bullets that she had used before had worked perfectly in comparison. It is for this reason that she came to the conclusion that all hunters of dangerous game should run each round through their rifle before trusting that ammunition. Tia also came to the conclusion that she would never fully trust that rifle again because of this incident. Now, I'm not trying to second guess or put down Tia. I just want to make a couple of points so that others don't make similar mistakes. First of all, this is an example of why you keep a round in the chamber. Second of all, this is an instance where a handgun would have been handy as a backup. Finally, since the bullets were the problem and not the rifle, I personally do not quite understand why you wouldn't just use the bullets that do work well. Now, let's go over what Tia was looking for when she got her current rifle, a custom Winchester Model 70 in .416 Remington. She wanted good ballistics, similar to a .30-06. She was looking for more quote-unquote punch than a .375 H&H or .375 Ruger. She also wanted a balanced, relatively light, and short rifle to be easy to carry and maneuver in dense brush. As Tia puts it, recoil is momentary, while toting a heavy rifle all hunting season can be rather tedious. Tia's new rifle has a fixed 2.5 power scope, 4+1 capacity, tape on the muzzle, and a rubber scope cover. It also has a Picatinny mount on the underside of the barrel that holds a flashlight for nighttime bear defense. She didn't feel the need to have iron sights installed on her new rifle because the same type of loopholed scope was on her father's .458 Win Mag, which has endured all sorts of abuse. She is also using hand-loaded Barnes TSX 300 grain bullets. Taj Shoemaker, Tia's brother, has a very heavily modified Ruger Model 77 Hawkeye, chambered in .375. He has a fixed power scope with a see-through scope cover. He shortened the stock and cut off some of the forend to reduce weight. He used electrical tape to attach Picatinny rail to the underside of the barrel. The rail holds a flashlight that is focused at the 20-yard point of impact. He used JB Weld to enlarge the safety, which would be great if you have thick gloves on. He wrapped duct tape around the balance point of the rifle so his hands are insulated from the cold rifle. Also, he makes sure to cover the muzzle with tape to keep water out. What about Phil Shoemaker? What gun does he use? For the longest time, approximately 3 decades, Phil was using a .458 Winchester Magnum, affectionately named Old Ugly. But after bullet testing in 2009, Phil found that the 30-06 220 grain Nosler partitions outpenetrated any other bullet that was tested. After that, he started carrying a 30-06. He had to use that 30-06 to shoot a bear that was wounded by a hunter who used a more powerful, high-recoiling caliber. Now, it's nice and all that the 30-06 partition penetrated so deeply, but wouldn't a caliber with more energy and a bigger wound be better? People such as Phil Shoemaker and elephant hunter W.D.M. Bell have noticed that it doesn't really matter what caliber you use, just as long as you hit the animal in the right place. Bell also started using smaller calibers after he came to this realization. But you don't have to take their word for it. This is something that can be easily observed if you keep track of the time it takes for an animal to either die or go down for good. This chart also demonstrates why you shouldn't think of effectiveness as something that should only be measured in foot-pounds of energy, because a handgun can kill in the same amount of time that a much more powerful rifle can. This leads me to the following quote, which I consider to be bad advice. The two animals we prefer to be hunted with the largest possible caliber are blue wildebeest and zebra. These must be the toughest plains game animals anywhere. We have spent more time tracking wounded blue wildebeest and zebra than any other plains game animal. Now, there wouldn't be any logical reason that zebra, for example, would be tougher than any other animal. Furthermore, we can easily observe that zebra drop in the same amount of time just like other animals do when their blood pressure drops. With this in mind, it's safe to say two things. One, we're all human and we can make mistakes, so you shouldn't take any one person's word as the gospel truth. This is why you should trust, but verify. Second, it's likely that the real problem is that some people are having trouble making good hits, and consequently are wounding animals. Obviously, a larger caliber with more recoil probably isn't the solution to this problem. Now, let's go over what features you would want to look for in a weapon for bear defense. First of all, more magazine capacity is always good. If you have a semi-auto or pump shotgun, the magazine should generally be flush with the barrel. Second of all, having a compact weapon that's not overly long or heavy is good. I tend to think that a 12.5-inch length of pull is generally the way to go, as an overly long length of pull will be irritating and cumbersome. The Beretta 1301, Savage Renegade, and Stoker M3000 are all semi-auto shotguns that allow you to have a relatively short length of pull. Other shotguns tend to have the action spring in the stock and don't have this option. For shotguns, I'd suggest an 18-inch long barrel. For rifles, it really depends on the caliber. 16 inches is good, for example, for an AR-10. As a point of reference, Kevin Robertson mentioned that if the barrels on certain dangerous game rifles were too long, they'd cut them down to 23 or 22.5 inches. I mention that because Kevin Robertson is an expert on hunting in Africa. Now, an enlarged safety that you can operate with gloved hands is also good. Likewise, you should also have a trigger guard that is large enough for gloved hands. AR-style rifles have the advantage here, because you can easily remove the trigger guard. That and the fact that there are aftermarket enlarged trigger guards available. Obviously, blued or parkerized weapons will easily rust. What you really want is stainless steel and synthetic materials to hold up well to harsh elements. Finally, none of the rifles I mentioned before that were used by the Shoemakers had slings attached. There is a reason for this. Your rifle should be in your hands where you can immediately use it, and not on a sling on your back. Obviously, carrying a weapon like this can be fatiguing on the hands. I have found that if you have a weapon with a pistol grip stock, it is much more comfortable to carry than one with a conventional stock. Likewise, if you hold the weapon by its point of balance with your non-dominant hand, it's easier to carry, particularly so if you have vertical foregrip attached there. This chart is comparing the fire rate of different weapons fired by the same shooter at a moving target that simulates a charging bear. Bear attacks are very fast, and you generally have little or no time to aim. So I'm going to go over two basic ways to increase the chances you hit something vital in the bear. The first option is to use a powerful expanding bullet like a 375 H&H. Such a bullet makes a large wound and therefore has a greater margin for error. What I mean by this is that a large wound will damage nearby organs that a smaller wound would normally miss. The downside to such weapons is that they have high recoil, which inevitably limits your ability to quickly fire the weapon. Depending on the action and the distance between the bear and you may only be able to fire 1 or 2 shots. Now, the brain of a charging bear is a small and difficult target. If you aim for the head and you're a bit off, you can shoot right over its head and the wound size won't matter at all. If you aim for the chest and you are a bit off, the size of the wound and the size of the heart/lungs will give you an excellent chance of making a lethal wound. Option 2 is to increase the number of projectiles going down range. You can achieve this by using a semi-auto shotgun loaded with buckshot, for example. Specifically, I would recommend hard cast lead buckshot that isn't any smaller than double-aught. With multiple projectiles going down range, you have a much greater chance of making a brain shot. It only takes one of those projectiles to make a good hit on the brain and instantly end the danger. A hybrid approach would be to use a semi-auto 308 rifle, which has a fairly good fire rate and still makes a pretty good wound size with good expanding bullets. Now, the conventional wisdom is that you should use the largest caliber you can handle, preferably a 375 Ruger, for example. This only really makes sense if you're hunting bear, for example, and the limiting factor is not recoil or fire rate, but rather visibility. Terrain and vegetation can limit your opportunity to take follow-up shots. So if you only have the opportunity for 1, maybe 2 shots, it's better to use a caliber that gives you better margin for error. In this situation, a Ruger Hawkeye in 375 Ruger can do the job well. In contrast, you could be hunting deer, for example, in a more open area, and you may want to have a rifle that can also be capable for bear defense. A Browning BAR in 30-06 would be the right weapon for this situation. If you're an average person looking for a weapon strictly for bear defense, though, a shotgun or an AR-10 would be much more appropriate. I'll talk about semi-auto shotguns and which are the most reliable in a separate, more in-depth video, so I'll just talk about pump actions for now. Depending on your preference for safety location, you may want a Mossberg with an ambidextrous tang safety, or a Remington 870 that has a crossbolt safety. By the way, a crossbolt safety generally allows you to use a pistol grip stock without having to alter your grip to push the safety off. Both of these Mossbergs have a long length of pull. The one at the top has greater capacity, ghost ring sights, but has a parkerized finish. The shotgun below it has the much better marine coat finish, which is handy if you live in an area that's frequently rainy or humid. The AR-10 has a nitride finish, which is much better than phosphate, but not quite as good as the marine coat. Obviously, all of these weapons have M-locks, so you can easily mount a flashlight for nighttime bear defense. Some people have even used smaller calibers like 5.56 or 5.45 rifles for bear defense. These are a couple of those encounters. A polar bear charged Zed Kadzau from 10 yards away. He shot it 7 or 8 times before it got within 10 feet of him. Chris Ayers came upon a grizzly bear that had its back turned to him. Chris then called out, "Hey bear," to let it know that he was there. The bear then turned and charged Chris, who fired about 13 shots. 2 or 3 of those bullets hit the bear, one of which penetrated the brain and ended the encounter. Now, it seems to me at least that calling out to the bear probably surprised it and caused the attack. In this situation, I would rather have not said anything and would have tried to carefully and quietly leave in the direction I came from. I'm not saying this to criticize anyone, I'm just interested in preventing any needless loss of life in the future. Finally, an AR-15 may not be the first thing people think of when you say, "Give me a good bear defense gun," but if you have deep penetrating bullets like FMJs, it certainly seems to be effective in a pinch. Let's talk about optics now. Many people who have survived bear attacks have had time to fire, but not to use their sights. Of course, there are exceptions, and this is why I consider good sights to be a necessity. Now, the Shoemakers seem to all like the 2.5 power loop-hold, but when you have any magnification, your ability to shoot quickly is degraded. At distances that bear charges happen, generally within 50 yards, magnification is not necessary anyhow. This is why I say that there are about two good options: a variable power scope that goes down to 1x, or a very durable red dot with a long battery life that can be left on continuously. I would also suggest backup iron sights in case your optic is damaged. Of course, fixed power scopes, particularly prism scopes, are generally much more durable than red dots or variable power scopes. By the way, it's also a good idea to have a laser sight and clear scope covers. Now, before I start going deep into comparing bullets and calibers, I just want to give you an overview of how much recoil certain calibers have. As a point of reference, about 20 foot-pounds of energy is enough to give you a bad flinch. Also, you can get semi-auto Browning BAR rifles chambered in calibers like 7mm Magnum and 30-06. If you want to pause the video to look closer, I'd recommend you do it now. Since I said this video applies to hunting as well, I wanted to include the ballistics of some different cartridges. All of the bullets except the 7mm 08 are nozzler partitions. As a rule of thumb, many bullets won't expand or will expand very poorly when they hit the target at under 2,000 feet per second. There are obviously exceptions to this rule, with certain calibers, or if you have an improved bullet design, like the Federal Terminal Ascent or the Hornady ELDX. These bullets are made to be more consistent at expanding and penetrating well, both at high velocities and low velocities. This doesn't mean that other bullets, like the ones on this chart, are bad. They're actually very good. They just have different design parameters. These are different bullets and how deep they penetrate when shot into water jugs. If you don't have 10% ballistic gelatin, water jugs can be a pretty good substitute. Generally, a 1-gallon water jug equals 4 inches of 10% ballistics gel. At the top is the 30-06 round that Phil Shoemaker recommends. Whether you're hunting bears or defending yourself from them, controlled expansion and deep penetration are necessities. Deep penetration means you can hit vitals regardless of odd angles or thick bone. Deep penetration can also mean a complete pass-through, which makes for a better blood trail, especially useful if there's a possibility you may have to track a bear through thick brush. Taj Shoemaker recommends the following bullets for bear: Barnes X, Nosler partitions, AccuBonds, Remington core locks, Swift A-frame, North Fork, and Spear hot core bullets. As always, the reason why you would use a 338 or 375 H&H is because you want more room for error, especially useful when you are making a shot under high stress. As for shotgun rounds, the Brennecke Classic Magnum, Green Lightning, and Special Forces Short Magnum all have good penetration and ballistics gel. The Remington Managed Recoil Slugger also has good penetration, but it's made out of soft lead and therefore not suitable for bear defense. In comparison, the Brenneckes are made of harder lead and are a good choice. Brennecke's website specifically recommends the Black Magic Magnum or the Magnum Crush for large, dangerous animals. By the way, the Magnum Crush is intended to be used only in rifled barrels. Some people have suggested that the D-Duplex Monolith 32 would be good for bear defense. Now, I can't compare them directly to Brennecke's, for example, but since they are made out of solid steel and they penetrate deeper than the Managed Recoil Remington Sluggers, it's safe to say that they are definitely capable for the job. Since the Monolith 32 slugs don't expand, I think it's a good time to talk about non-expanding bullets. First of all, some people believe it's best for a bullet to transfer all of its energy into the animal. Let's say we have a non-expanding bullet that stops exactly halfway through an animal on a broadside shot. If we increase the velocity of that bullet enough, it will pass completely through that animal and therefore do double the damage. Obviously, the animal will die either way. However, the only way the faster bullet can be considered a bad thing is if the recoil becomes severe as an unintended consequence. Non-expanding bullets are a necessity for almost all handgun calibers for bear defense. They are viable for shotgun slugs, but for rifle calibers, I tend to think that the fact that the small wound size and the resulting little margin for error may not be worth the increased penetration. However, there are valid arguments and examples why you would use such non-expanding bullets. This is one of the bear attacks that happened to the late Ed Stevenson. The bear was literally standing face to face with Ed. Thankfully, Ed's dogs distracted the bear and caused it to turn away from Ed. This gave him the chance to take his .45-70 and shoot the bear lengthwise and into the vitals. Obviously, a non-expanding bullet of reasonable caliber would guarantee the necessary penetration for such a shot. There are two things that I have to mention though. First of all, someone has already demonstrated that you can shoot straight through a lengthwise brown bear with a 350 grain interlock Hornady soft point. Second of all, such situations that require lengthwise penetration seem to be relatively rare. I don't actually know of any other cases like Ed Stevenson's. While we're on the topic, a 12-gauge FTX Custom Light Sabo can apparently pass lengthwise through a black bear. Such deep penetrating bullets are the exception and not the rule. If you shoot a bear in the side, depending on things like the impact velocity and the angle of the shot, many bullets will be found under the hide on the opposite side of the bear, or will have just enough energy to exit. An example of this is the 375 H&H 270 grain Barnes TSX. The first shot broke both shoulders and exited. The second shot entered the shoulder, broke some ribs, traveled through about 3 feet of bear, and broke the skin, but did not have enough energy to exit. Similarly, the 127 grain Barnes LRX 6.5 Creedmoor bullet traveled through about 3 feet of bear, including 5 inches of fat, the spine, and the ribs on both sides. I mentioned the penetration depths in ballistics gel as a point of reference to compare to other bullets that have been tested in gelatin but not on bears. This is a 180 grain Barnes TSX bullet. It was shot from a 300 Winchester short magnum and impacted at roughly 3,000 feet per second. It went through ribs, the front shoulder, and was recovered from the hide on the opposite side. Because it hit at such high velocity, the petals were almost all torn off. Obviously, this bullet worked well enough to kill the bear, but you really want to see your bullet retain all of its weight. This is why I think using calibers like 300 Remington Ultra Mag or 300 Winchester Short Mag for bear defense is not a good idea. At close range, bullets will simply come apart. This can mean most bullets will underpenetrate. If you absolutely have to use such calibers for bear defense out of necessity, pick the heaviest bullet weights available and get something like a Nosler partition or a Barnes TSX that will at least allow the base of the bullet to penetrate deeply. Remember how I said soft lead rifled slugs aren't good? This is an example why. The YouTuber BroB223 shot a black bear in the shoulder with 3 Winchester Super X 1-ounce slugs. Only one of those slugs actually managed to penetrate the vitals, and just barely. The bear did die, yes, but no one should bet their life on these slugs being able to kill a bear. In a different video, I mentioned all the reasons why having a handgun is a good idea. These are various bullets that were shot into clear ballistics gel. You'll see HCFN on a lot of these charts. It means hard cast flat nose. Obviously, when I start talking about which caliber is best, I also have to mention whether a semi-auto or revolver is the best for the task at hand. Concerns over a lack of power and unreliability are often the reasons given for why some people decide to use revolvers. Basically, when you have a non-expanding bullet, power is really just a means to increase penetration. If you choose a caliber that uses less power to get the same penetration, the bear likely won't notice the difference, but you will because you'll have less recoil. As for reliability, let's go over 3 basic reasons why a semi-auto might jam in a bear defense situation. Reason number 1 is you've intentionally shoved your handgun against the bear, and this has caused a malfunction after you have fired. This happened in the bear attack on Bridger Petrini. Bear hair had interfered with the slide, so Bridger racked the slide, which fixed the problem. This is not a hard problem to avoid because you don't actually have to press the pistol against the bear. Reason number 2 is if the ammunition is unreliable. You can avoid this by not using wide flat-nose bullets and testing to see if your ammo is reliable beforehand. Reason number 3 is if you are in very icy and cold conditions. Revolvers are much more susceptible to ice and snow than semi-autos because of the exposed cylinder. Cold can also cause some lubricants to become gummy, which is a real problem for semi-autos, not so much for revolvers. However, if you use a good lubricant like Hoppy's number 9 with Weather Guard, this won't be a problem at all. In comparison, Frog Lube doesn't work well in the cold. I personally have no concerns about the reliability of semi-autos, as long as you don't use wide flat-nose bullets. The benefits of wide flat-nose bullets is that they make a wider and deeper wound. I'd be perfectly content with regular flat-nose bullets in a semi-auto, but others may see it differently. The handgun penetration chart I'm showing you now demonstrates that 9mm plus P loads can rival 10mm loads. It's safe to say that the many people who already own 9mm can confidently use those same handguns for bear defense, provided they use plus P hardcast ammo. If you were to buy a handgun specifically for bear protection, I would suggest getting a 357 SIG. The reason for this is that 357 SIG will have very deep penetration, certainly more than 64 inches of gelatin, given how 9mm plus P performs. How deep exactly, we just don't know, because I haven't found any relevant 357 SIG penetration tests. 357 SIG may not be for everyone though. As far as I know, there is only one factory load of hardcast bullets available. 357 SIG is just not that common, so practice ammo is not only harder to find, but it's more expensive. However, many 40 Smith & Wesson pistols are convertible to 357 SIG, and vice versa, so you may choose to practice with 40 Smith & Wesson ammo. Also, if you plan to reload your own cast bullets for 357 SIG, it uses .355 caliber bullets, just like 9mm does. As far as specific handguns go, I recommend buying a Glock 22 Gen 5 MOS in 40 Smith & Wesson, so that you can convert it to 357 SIG. Now, Glock's website says not to use lead bullets. However, there is an article on Buffalo Boar's website that explains that hardcast lead is very different than regular soft lead bullets. Anyhow, this is somewhat irrelevant if you get an aftermarket 357 SIG barrel. I'd suggest getting a longer one, maybe 5 inches for more velocity. Now, 10mm is much more common than 357 SIG, especially among people using them for bear defense, so you'll have a better chance of finding practice ammo and a much larger variety of hardcast lead ammo. 10mm is definitely effective on bears, and the guns generally hold the same amount of rounds as 357 SIG guns do. It's not hard to find a suitable 10mm. The Glock G40 Gen 4 MOS and the Optics Ready MNP 2.0 are both good choices. If you want a revolver, I'd suggest getting one of these. They're both 357 Magnum, by the way. The Ruger has a longer barrel and a 6-shot capacity. If you want a shorter barrel and an 8-round capacity, get the Smith & Wesson. Both are stainless steel to resist harsh weather. Thanks for watching, and if you could subscribe, I'd greatly appreciate it.